I don't want to hear that. I don't give a shit about the market. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to blame it on the market like, some do. And so it was a very illuminating thing because he's just so granular with the numbers. My other friend, he's like, anything over 2 million, he's like, it is sitting. So it's that feedback that you get from these professionals, one that's hyper granular, the other one is a really great professional. And so it's illuminating for me because I'm seeing the numbers from that standpoint, and kind of going back to what you and I mentioned earlier. The guy that's the granular guy, he goes, it kind of feels a little bit like 2010.
Is it officially a buyer's market? That's what we want to talk about today, not only nationally, but here also with some insight in Florida specifically, because Florida seems to be one of those states that maybe changes towards the end, not so much at the beginning, right? So, Alex, what are you seeing right now in the market for buyers and sellers?
We were in a buyer's market for condos as of about 3 months ago. From some of the markets, the higher price condos was a buyer's market about 5 months ago. This is according to the data that I'm looking at: month supply of inventory, under 3 months of inventory; seller market between 3 and 6 months of inventory, neutral, and over 6 buyer. So, anyways, high end condos on the beach, especially, was a buyer's market about 5-6 months ago. The lower end started to move into that about 3-4 months ago, and as of about a couple months ago, both single-family homes across the board were in a buyer's market.
And for those that are watching that aren't necessarily real estate agents, and I know most of our audience are real estate agents, and let's just for a moment pause and say, for those that are less experienced in real estate sales, how do you determine that? What are the triggers, or what are you seeing that says, oh, it's a buyer's market, as opposed to just a statement that someone arbitrarily says because they think so?
Data. Under 3 months of inventory, seller's market; between 3 and 6 months of inventory, neutral, and over 6 is a buyer's market.
So
the
fact that there's enough inventory or too much inventory at a given time.
Yeah. And so I think, we're diving back into the real estate agents out there. I think this is something that maybe some of them aren't in tune with looking at. They maybe weren't aware of it. Maybe they don't have the data systems like we do that look at that, and they're just going by a market analysis, of like we call it the micro market. The micro market would be your CMA for your community area, type of home within a certain circumference. Kind of an appraiser would look at it. So they're just looking at that, and that is a good way to assess, pricing. But you need to look at, I think, especially now, we need to look at the overarching market, which is, we call it the macro picture. What's going on with the inventory for this type of property: condo, villa, townhome, single family home, waterfront, price point, that macro picture. Hey, there's a lot. So they're looking in this area, but like, there's this much going on in that particular price point and type of property in that area, and that's what you're going up against. So if that buyer's out there looking, there's a lot for them to look at if they're in a buyer's market. So you need to be priced relative to all those other units well.
And so that's what our channel is about, is making sure that our agent audience is remaining relevant. And this is one of those opportunities for them to sharpen the skill, or potentially adopt a new skill that they didn't have to because they came in on a market that was healthy and easy for them to transact real estate. And so in order for an agent now to remain relevant and that is newer, what do they need to learn besides maybe getting ahead of the data and understanding it? Now, certainly they need to, probably the most important skill is how to communicate these changes to the people they're trying to serve, right? What does it mean for them? Because we've been used to, we're human, we're creatures of habit, and buyers and sellers, they have their independent agendas as to I want to get the cheapest price for the purchase of this house, or the seller is like, I want to get the most amount of money for the sale of my home. And we're at this transitional phase where we started this video talking about, are we now in a buyer's market? That transition from what we were accustomed to potentially a new market means that a new skill set must come about. New skills, new talking points, new conversations have to start to happen in order to be successful in this transitional period.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and you use the word transition and use, another kind of term, or you're right, we get accustomed to things. The thing is in real estate is it's a lagging indicator, or it just, you don't, especially if you didn't, like Eddie, you and I had the experience back from the 2010. I was out with, some friends in the business who, one of them sells a lot of high end stuff. Another one sells more stuff in Port St. Lucie. That's, that kind of $400,000 to $600,000 range. And one of them in particular, really the kind of lower end guy, not lower end, but 4 to 6 is compared to multi-million dollars lower end. But he's a maniac with tracking his numbers, right? And we've talked about this. How many calls am I making? How many conversations am I making? And he sets goals based on, hey, this is what I did last year. These are the results that I got. And so if I up this by this percent, then my sales should go up by this percent. So he starts off with, how many hours am I putting in? How many calls am I putting in? And he gets really granular with the numbers, bro. And he's like, man, I'm like 32% over the dials that I made last year. And he's like, I'm whatever percent under appointments met, or appointments set, appointments met, and conversions. So he's doing a third more effort and getting a quarter less of the results. So he has a coach as well, and he said, I'm going to get a new coach. But the coach is like, oh, well, it's the market and it's okay. You're doing good. He's like, I don't want to hear that. I don't give a shit about the market. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to blame it on the market like, some do. And so it was a very illuminating thing because he's just so granular with the numbers. My other friend, he's like, anything over 2 million, he's like, it is sitting. So it's that feedback that you get from these professionals, one that's hyper granular, the other one is a really great professional. And so it's illuminating for me because I'm seeing the numbers from that standpoint, and kind of going back to what you and I mentioned earlier. The guy that's the granular guy, he goes, it kind of feels a little bit like 2010. And I was like, yeah, it's not quite like that, because that was crazy, right? Like, that was, if you looked at the inventory, I wasn't as acute with looking at the numbers back then, but the feeling of, man, I'm putting in effort here. Like, I'm putting in effort. My listings are going up. I mentioned to you, I'm carrying more listings right now than pre-COVID. So interesting times, man. We can dive into what needs to happen within that, rather than just going, well, it's the market, and hide your head in the sand and blame.
Let's shift into that. What do what as a leader are you, as the guy that writes the checks, more specifically? What are your right? You're signing the checks for these things that need to continue to happen. One of the things you mentioned to me, which is always something that I really do believe is not talked about a lot. And I don't know, and I don't like to necessarily use that reference because it seems like it's this kind of secret. It's not talked about. But I also, running the brokerage as well, recall this too. When times are lean, you're still writing the check as a leader. And one of the things you're concerned about is the expense that is involved for carrying listings longer than you're used to carrying them, right? So you would attribute the lifeline of this listing. It would be X amount of time, and it would cost you X amount of dollars to bring that listing up and available for the world to see. And there was a cost there, and we understood the cost. But now with time or the ability to potentially take listings, and now this is kind of where a concern for a team leader like yourself comes in, is that you're not the one necessarily making the decision at that listing appointment, right? So you may be bringing on listings that are not optimal for this market environment, and that listing may not sell, and it still costs you X amount of dollars to bring it onto the market. And so that is a concern that someone who writes checks like yourself probably thinks about, and a lot of people don't talk about. What do you say?
Yeah, you hit it spot on, man. I mean, my experience is still for that agent. I'm like, oh, I'm not a team leader or whatever. It's like, okay, just understand, or maybe hear what I'm saying here, and maybe it equates to your experience. So, for me, to put a property on the market, just me, because I still do go off on listing appointments, and because let's say I'm a single agent out there. Uh, my time, I try to look at my time as $350 an hour. It's just kind of my benchmark, right? So drive, prepare should take an hour or so, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little bit more. You got to figure drive time. You got to, and that should be, let's just say an hour and a half. Okay, so now you're 2.5 hours in. We go to listing agreement, listing appointment. You're talking usually 2 hours minimum, right? Of looking at the house, going over the paperwork, market analysis, all that. Talking probably on average about 2 hours there. So you're 4.5 hours in just by time alone, right there. Never mind your gas. If we don't, I got the Tesla, but it's still charging it and costs that money for electricity. So, then it's going to be a $450 to $500 photo package. Okay. So if we go back just right there, actually, let's add a little bit more. Now the listing goes off to the transaction coordination department, listing department. Talking another couple hours there. Let's say I'm an aggregate of, $40 an hour there. So let's just say there's $100 there. So you got $100 plus the $450. So you're at $550. You got 4.5 hours. My time was worth $350 an hour. There's another, let's just say, is another $1,300. So, dude, right there, I'm easy $1,600 to put that property on the market. Full stop. Then, if it's overpriced, let's go with it's priced right. Now let's go with it's overpriced. So worst case scenario in that regard. Then it's the calls each week. Here's what's going on. Here's market analysis again, price change again. You're gonna talk another, in the lifespan of a listing. Let's say you got a 6 month and you didn't sell. You got to think you're going to have another 4 to 5 hours in there. Maybe, let's just say it's 3 again. So now I'm back to another, $1,200. So, dude, I'm $3,000 for no return. Worst case scenario, right? So, I guess my point in that is that, I mentioned this off camera here, that listings start to become a liability. You've got assets, right? That bring in money, and you have liabilities that money goes away. So they start to become a liability. So each, I love it kind of going over this stuff. I do it in my head in some ways, and it's good to get mildly acute with it here and think it through. It's like, okay, every listing that doesn't sell costs me $3,000. So now let's just spin it back around. As a team leader, you're carrying 25 listings. You're taking on 10 listings a month. There's, dude, I don't even want to say it. It's like 30 grand, 30 grand a month, right? Like that adds up quick.
And then you've got,
so that's not all my time on the, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just saying, you got to sell the other ones to even just make up for those losers.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'll just give you like an example too, and this is something I'm gonna maybe start to institute because you got to have repercussions. Like, because the agents on the team, they're all very, very thoughtful, and they don't burn through money. Even though we got a big accountability thing going on right now, with number of dials and what time is it takes to put in and all that. Of like, hey, you're taking food off my plate if you're not calling leads and that kind of thing. And they're all pretty good, but we just want to get more dialed in. Back to that other guy, like it's taking him, he's doing 30% more, getting 25% less. Like, guys, this is someone who really tracks their numbers. So you might not be tracking your numbers as much. We're trying to do that to help you help us run a mutually profitable business. You guys have a profitable business for your time, effort, and everything. I'm running a profitable business. So I think, I don't know where we go from there, but I think it still comes back to looking at each time you're sitting down, single agent out there, really going, should I take this listing? Not, can I get this listing? Should I take this listing? And that's a mind shift back to, dude, this, it's all a lagging thing. And especially if you haven't been through what we went through in 2010, where that happened pretty fast. This seems a little different, but it has a similar feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, listen, well, all these market shifts are a little bit different, right? They all have their own nuances. The circumstances around them is always a little bit different. But I want to double click into something you said that I think is really important. If we take this conversation today into an area of where maybe these are concepts and ideas that you haven't had to think about before because of the market conditions. If we could for a moment talk about, because I love that you brought it up and you brought it up very organically, and I think of it as well, is this idea of charging for your time. Like, I know that I know that you walk around, and I do too, with a number in my head as to what my time is worth. And I know there's going to be some people that are maybe even newer in this industry or not, and just think, well, this is just part of the business. This is what I do. This is my work. This is my job. Now, why would I attribute a dollar amount and not an arbitrary one? Because I bet if I ask you how you calculated yours, you could tell me, and I can tell you how mine was calculated as well. But that is ultra important, because then you're really operating a business, even if you're an independent agent or a single agent, not on a team or not a broker with a team or a team leader. Is incredibly important to attribute a number of value for what you do, because it allows you to make much better decisions in your business. Is this worth my effort? Or am I losing here? So that, I believe, is a incredibly important strategy for a successful business, regardless of the business that you're in, that you put money on your name. You got to do it. What are you worth? Why aren't you at McDonald's? Well, I'm not at McDonald's. God bless people that work at McDonald's, but I'm not at McDonald's because I'm not worth $12.50 an hour. I'm worth more than $12.50. Would you work for $12.50 an hour? No, right? So what are you worth in this real estate space, in this business? So I love that you brought that up, but can you dive a little deeper into that? And is that something you share with your team to actually come to a value of your time and respect it, especially when there's other people involved like you, right? That they also have to then be a little bit accountable to you because you're writing the check to make things happen. So how do you see that?
I did an old, it was very illuminating. I think I've mentioned it in here before, the breakdown of pie time, productive time, indirect productive time, and everything time. So basically, you can just look at, if you want to do some kind of guerrilla math on it, you could look at, and you got to be, I'm sure not everybody's tracking how many hours they're working, even though that's a good idea because this is what we're talking about here. But you could give it kind of not an arbitrary, but a rough. You'd say, okay, last year I worked, let's be honest, and you got to be as honest as you can. Say, okay, I worked 40 weeks last year. I don't care. 45 weeks last year, 50 weeks last year, whatever. Most of us, come on, you mailed in a lot of around Thanksgiving, around Christmas. You went on a holiday for in the summertime with your family. And let's say that, and this is where it starts to get acute, man. Like, how much time did you actually, how much time were you on appointments with people that are ready, willing, and able to transact? It's a good exercise to go through, right? And just give a rough number into it. Just put pen to paper and say, okay, let me be kind of as honest as I can here. So it was on, and let's say you made $100,000 last year. And you can kind of just run it from a rough numbers here. Let's say that you were on appointments for, I don't know, 15 hours a week, right? So let's take out the old calculator here and kind of do some guerrilla math. So it was on, so let's say you worked 45 weeks, right? And you worked, you were on appointments, let's just say 20 hours a week, right? So times 20, right? So that's 900 hours. So if you take $100,000 divided by 900. So this is just productive time, right? So you take 100,000 divided by 900. So that's $111 an hour, right? So not bad, right? But, how much time were you prospecting? Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, right? So let's say you added, I don't know, dude, like I would venture to say that agents aren't spending more than 10 hours a week prospecting. And that's probably, yeah, you give the face, right? Like probably.
That was my number.
Thank you. Okay, so now we got our 40 hours, right? We got 40 hours. 40 weeks times 10, right? Obviously, that's 400. So add the 900 to 400, right? So that's 1,300. So take the 100,000 divided by 1,300. That's $76 an hour, right? So now when you start to add, now we're not even adding, like we've talked about before, buddy, right? Like you should have a transaction coordinator. If you don't have a transaction coordinator, are you adding listings? Are you, all the other stuff? Are you setting up MLS searches and all that, dude? So let's just say you didn't do all that, or let's just say you're doing listings. Let's say you're setting up your own searches. You're doing some Facebook posts. I don't know, dude, the stuff that's a marketing person, right? So let's just add, I don't know, let's add another 15 hours a week minimum, right? So 15 times 40 equals 600. So now we add another 600 to the 1,300, right? So that makes us 1,900. So we take $100,000 divided by 1,900. That's $52 an hour. So you can see that, and that's somebody that's making $100,000. Say you made $50,000. And you did everything that I just went over there, you're down to $26 an hour. I don't know. Am I off there? I'm doing wicked guerrilla math there, but
I think the point is made in terms of, what you end up being worth for all the work that needs to get done in order to create an opportunity for yourself, execute on the opportunity, and actually close, and someone hands you a check at the end. What we're saying in this conversation today is, A, are your skills sharp enough to even get to $25 an hour, or whatever the number was? And then, or your skills sharp enough to get closer to the $111 that you first started with? And what is one of those determining factors in that? Well, your skill set, your ability to and your ability to weather the change. Because as much as some of those higher end examples that you made, the guys on the golf course, the ones that are just dialed into their systems, they see the change, right? And as winners, we don't typically blame other things, but the word always comes out, well, it's the market, like you said earlier. Well, it's the market. But yeah, but I'm the master of my destiny. I make the wheel turn, right? And that's a mindset that you and I have, and some people that have accomplished anything typically have learned just from going through the process that you end up being the master of your domain in terms of, you know, where you end up in life. And so I'm not surprised that he said, yeah, I'm not buying into that whole it's the market thing, right? I'm going to make this happen. So not everybody carries that mindset. So the minute this kind of upends the way you were used to making some money, and now your value is lower because it's more difficult to close on a transaction, you know, what do I need to do now? If you're that agent, what do I need to do now? Well, we talked about some data. We talked about sharpening skills. We've talked about valuing your time. So where do we go from here? Do we expect the drop off to continue inside of real estate in terms of the agents that hold on and stay inside the market? And then what does that say about the ones that do stay on that maybe are not sharpening their skills, but they're still, maybe instead of going out on 12 appointments a year and kind of hanging on, doing a little bit of business and maybe landing 6, 7, 8 of those, what if they're only going now on 6 or 7 appointments and maybe landing 1 or 2 or 3 of those? How does that serve the market? Are they the most ready and able to service that client's property in this market? Doesn't it become more challenging then? That's where my brain goes. Doesn't it become more challenging to really do your very best if not sharp enough to give it?
Yeah, I think let's get from solution based here to a couple things. First, looking at, if you start to look at that P time, right? It's so important to get on more appointments, right? Because like as he was saying, I'm doing more of this effort here to get lesser results here. If you're in the E time, the everything time of, if you don't have a transaction coordinator, it's like, well, I can't afford a transaction coordinator. It's like, you can't not get a transaction coordinator because you've got to get that everything time, entering listings, everything that can possibly be leveraged by someone like that done. Then here's the trick, where a lot of people, I think, get a little bit stuck. They mistake leverage for luxury, meaning, you know what I mean? They mistake that, okay, I've got this time freed up over here, and which is leverage, transaction coordinator, maybe someone who's doing some ads for you, so forth, right? Putting the listing up, when you go under agreement, is the escrow done? All that kind of 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, like that's all leverage time. But then they take that leverage time that frees up their schedule. And look, let's just make the analogy. You go to the beach. That's luxury. You got leverage. Now you need to take that time and put it into the I time, which is the indirect productive time, which is prospecting, so that you can get on more ready, willing, and able P time, right? So that you can make up for the market, right? So that's one thing. The next thing is, you mentioned it, of sharpening skills. So then when you're on that listing appointment, you're literally looking at this like, hey, it's not, can I get this listing? It's, should I take this listing? Because if you sit there with somebody and you understand the data and you look at that they're overpricing the property, you look at this is a liability. I shouldn't take this listing. But the mindset goes back to 6 months, a year ago, even 2 years ago. Some people still have this lagging understanding of that the market has shifted. And they're like, if I get a listing, it's going to sell. It's like, no, it's not. And like, I had this conversation last night with this agent that went out. She's got her first $700,000 signed listing. So excited. She's mostly a buyer's agent, right? Built her confidence up more. Her confidence went up more from coming into role play, coming into the phone jams, coming to every like call session with us, the little mini coaching that I do after. So her confidence went up, right? So she was sitting at the table, and it was this, this couple. They want to sell the house to be closer to their kids. Decent motivation, because she went into the whole thing, gave me the story, and I was like, I always come back to, what's the motivation? Because if the motivation is low, the motivation's low. So if you're overpriced, they don't have a high motivation to lower the price. They don't have a high motivation to price it right. We got to get it sold. We really want to be close to our kids. So the wife wants to be really close to the kids. The husband wants to get the most amount for the property. Very stubborn person. I won't get too in depth with it, but it's like, she has the mindset like, oh, my first, $700,000 listing. And it's like, I sat there with her and I went, look, this is not only all your time that went into it, which is great because she learned how to prepare. She went through the discomfort of being on a $700,000 listing appointment. That's all really good stuff. So that's not a throwaway. That's not like wasted time, because that skill, that experience is going to serve you in the future. That being said, what is wisdom? Wisdom is, she comes back to me. What do you think, Alex? Rather than, I got the listing and just, put it up. And it's like, what do you think? She's like, I had this feeling. She goes, I had this feeling that maybe I shouldn't take this. I was like, wow, that is so great for being on your first kind of that price point and not getting caught up in, I got my first 700,000 listing. She was thinking on a higher level, and also using a little intuition. And I was like, that's so good. That's so good that you're thinking that way. I said, because she's like, well, the team. Yeah, absolutely, man. I was like, that's just so being aware of something past like my, because we can get so confused about what we're uncomfortable about unless we're really like thinking about it, getting feedback from someone who has been there, right? So I was like, okay, I really appreciate that. She's like, I don't want the team to spend the money. I was like, well, thank you. Appreciate that, because the team is this guy, you said, right? The checks, right? So I said, it's not just, and I appreciate, the price, the photos and putting it on the market and all that. It's like your time after, right? All of the 20-minute conversations, the 30-minute conversations of lower the price. Well, we don't want to lower the price. Well, he won't lower the price. It's like, and she lost sleep over it the night before. So I'm like, you lost 2.5 hours sleep. So now you're crappy today because of the thoughts that are going on in your head and the feeling that's going on in your heart. So kind of coming full circle with this, Eddie, is, have a good mentor that can say, hey, maybe you shouldn't take that listing. And it's okay not to. And don't mistake. And after, it's like, use that, say, okay, I just won myself 5 hours over the next 3 months. There's an hour a week of prospecting to find somebody that's ready, willing, and able to purchase or sell. Your mental, wherewithal, your mental health, right? Your brain damage that comes from having the Groundhog Day pricing. You said, it's all pricing. We don't want to lower the price. Can't you just bring somebody who brings an offer? Why won't somebody bring an offer? It's like, because nobody's coming over to the house because there's 14 months of inventory and, they've got this amount to look at, like, right? So I think that, coming full circle back to this, man, understanding those months supply of inventory, and B, being really good at understanding doing a market analysis for in your respective community, but also relative to the overall market. So those are new skills that I think some aren't good at doing really good market analysis. Because I know I'm going on here, and will land this thing. But she said, I said, what's it really? What do you think it's really worth? Because they wanted to price it at $790. Okay, just a good example here. And she goes, and I said, what are the recent sales? She said, well, there was one that sold. She goes, I think it's $690. And I said, why do you think that? And she said, well, there was one that sold 4 months ago for $690, kind of the same unit. And I said, that's a different market. So now you're going based on a sale from 4 or 5 months ago, and we're in a different market right now. So she's like, well, there were lower units that sold for $650. I'm like, this unit, which has 300, 400 square foot more, is actually worth what those $650 units sold for. So the $790,000 price point that they were bring us offers, yeah, we'll take $725. It's like, no, this thing is actually at $650. So that's a hard pill to swallow, man. And if you're not listening to stuff like this or have mentors like us that you can get feedback like she did from me last night, you're just like, why isn't this selling? Why, it should sell at $690. It's like, no, it's $650 now.
I love how much forethought. First of all, thank you for that explanation, because there's just so much value in that explanation. There's just so many things that I can peel off of what you just said. Not only the journey that she went through to pause and say, should I be taking this listing? That right there, to me, immediately sets her apart from the vast majority. So kudos to her, and kudos to you for your training and your ability to mentor your agents the way you do, because that's not easy to do. Because we know that real estate agents are looking at the check at the end of the rainbow more often than not, right at the get. And I would agree, or I would say, and you might agree, that that's not the right approach. And so now is the most critical time to pause on all of it and say, am I doing the right thing for my business? Am I doing the right thing for my customers? Am I doing the right thing to have longevity in this market, or in this industry rather? Am I creating the habits, the systems, the processes, the ideals that will ensure a strong, healthy, long career in this industry? And that, to me, is a cornerstone right there, to be able to do that. And I know we're getting in a little bit into the weeds in terms of, the thought process around taking listings, but man, you have to. And hopefully this is right. Hopefully this is a conversation that really brings value to somebody that's like, these guys are really kind of double clicking into this a little bit deeper. And maybe I didn't give so much thought to that, or I'm not getting necessarily that kind of support or that kind of guidance where I am, or maybe just a solo agent in all different respects. And so you don't really have these conversations with a fellow professional in your office or in your ecosystem or in your network. These are really, really important, because you mentioned something on the other side of not making these wise decisions before you take a listing or decide to go into business with a potential customer, because that's what you're doing, is a lot of pain, is a lot of the reverse, is not the forward momentum you want and the check at the end. It's the sleepless nights, which then you eloquently shared with us, is then that just takes away from the next day and the next day after that and the day after that. So now you're in a deficit. Now you're going backwards. You're not even at a standstill. You're just going backwards. And then you start having the conversations: is this for me? Am I making the right decision? There's trouble at home now because you can't pay X bill or Y bill. Now you've got issues with your family and your personal life. It's just like this snowballing effect. Make the right choice, have the right leadership, give it some forethought like she did. I mean, I love that. Even in the face of taking on probably her very biggest listing that she's had so far. right? And the promise of that commission, which we know, as we wrap that promise in today's market, is not so much of a promise. And then the relationship with the leadership, the guy who's writing the check, the Alex in the office who's writing the check for a listing you should never have taken. And then there's the whole, and I'm sorry, let me just finish with this, then there's the whole skill set around having the right conversation with the person that's sitting across from you in that home, that buyer and seller, or that seller in this case, let's just say, for this example, that has this other expectation about what they can get from their home, which may very well be 6 months behind or a year behind, based on the neighbor down the street that sold 14 months ago. 14 months ago. It's hard to drive or peel off that expectation that they may have in their head. I'm here to get you the most money that's possible for the market. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'm here. The commission I make is based on how much your house sells for. I'm in this to sell it for $2 million. But the reality is the house is only worth $650,000. So why would I not try to work in your favor? This is the data. This is the data not only that I'm looking at, but the agent who's going to bring the buyer is looking at and counseling their client on what the offer should be. We're all looking at the same stuff. Let's meet right where we need to meet.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you brought up there, man. And you and I really look, whoever's still watching this is what it's about. This is the truth. As we see it, and hopefully we articulated it and weren't just, kind of pontificating here, man. Like, went over some granular numbers here, went over, stories that are very salient stories. And, so that's it, man. We're just here to really add value. I think this is, we're, as we get deeper and deeper into what we're doing here, Eddie, we're really going like, this is what's going on right now. And then based on our experience, like, hey, you and I mean, you're doing a different thing, and you're sending us referrals. You're not out there in the field anymore, but you remember 2010, and you remember the fear that was out there and the sense that was out there, and you can feel what buyer. I mean, I got countless stories, man, and this is why we meet each week and we talk, and everybody gets to hear. It's not these water cooler, oh, can you believe the market, and can you believe the buyer did this? Yes, there's a certain amount of, we have a kind of thing of no complaining. It's not, you don't complain about it. It's like, what are you learning? What is going on here that you can hear from somebody else? This guy that's been through 20 years of it, yes, but also these other people that are out in the field that, we went under agreement on this property. Here's a little story. This is not water cooler. It's not a complaining thing, but it's like, we went under agreement. So maybe you're somebody out there like this. We went under agreement, ticked off all the boxes. They wanted this, and this. Ticked off all the boxes, right? And this is one of the things my dad used to say, don't count the money until the check is cashed, right? So some are going in, taking a listing, calculating the listing in their head. Like, nope. Some are going out and showing 20 properties, finally get somebody under agreement, counting the thing in their head. Nope. Like, don't. Because that is a luxury that you're taking, right? When the thing hasn't happened, to kind of dovetail a little bit into that luxury thing. You're already kind of spending the money. You got a ways to go. You got to get through inspections. So anyways, kind of coming back to that story, ticked off all the boxes, brought over, their mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law said, I don't like the hinges on that door. Dude, you can't make this up, right? But there's fear. So like they heard something on television, or their friends are like, oh, you can get a better deal or whatever. And they canceled the agreement because of hinges on a door. So I'm not complaining. I'm not like going, can you believe the buyers? No, I'm saying it's going to happen. As Seneca said, like the unforeseen blow lands the hardest. Expect that you're going to get these, right? You're going to get these unforeseen, like, I can't believe, like, it ticked off all the boxes. Why would they do that? Well, they did. and it's probably going to happen to you. So what do you got to do? Back to the guy that does, his numbers, you got to prospect twice as much. And your skills got to get 2 to 3 times better. That's just the truth. That's the reality. If you think this is hyperbole, okay. I'm speaking from my truth, the way I see it.
Well, let's end it there because there is a lot of truth spoken here today. And I would even say that this is probably a really good setup for the next one, meaning now that you're sitting at the table with your client, let's go over some scenarios next time as to how you can make the right decisions like your agent did in terms of stopping, pausing, and after going through a set of questions and conversation, deciding whether this is the right listing to take and why that necessarily. I know we've touched into why it's a benefit to you to maybe step away from that listing or that opportunity because it's not the right opportunity. But let's dive a little bit deeper into that. I think that'll be really kind of tactical and very specific in terms of how to handle that conversation and when to stand up, shake their hand, thank them for their time, and go on to your next opportunity. Because that's what you need to do in order to stay successful in this changing market. And so, I mean, with that, what do you think about that idea for next time?
I think that's a very relevant discussion. And what we can do too is I'll show you, we'll use this setup. We've used up different setups before, but on this one, I'm going to be able to maybe show month supply of inventory. And because you're showing them, but you're also showing you. This is your business. So you need to see, okay, hey, they're priced here. This is the inventory that's either doubled or a third more or tripled in some instance since 3 or 4 months ago. Like, you got to ask yourself based on these numbers, do I believe that I can sell this property? Because if you're on hope and you're not on, you want to get to as much certainty as you can, as Tony Robbins would say, we want to be certain as we can about things. You need to be honest with yourself, and maybe you need to up some skills. We'll show you some things that I think will help you, and I think that you're spot on, Eddie. I think this is a very, very relevant conversation, and I think I hope that the folks out there see it as value. And you can reach out to Eddie or I. We can help you out in different ways, shapes, and forms. How to attract more business, maybe so you're not talking on the phone as much, but you do need to be good when you're talking on the phone. Not just, we're going to do Facebook ads and we're going to do this and that. It's like having relevant conversations about value. And as I've said before, pricing is 80% of marketing, and especially in a market like this.
That's it. That's it right there. But in the meantime, if you've got questions or this triggers a question for you in your head based on this conversation before we get to the next episode next week, because we are committed to shooting these for you every single week, please drop that in the comments. And until next time, my friends, we'll see you. Thanks, buddy.
Take care, brother.